get started. Okay.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Not sure how many people are watching the live stream, but welcome. This is the PrIMES medical student panel. Most of these guys, actually almost all of these guys have been here. We're first-year medical students at Cornell. Really excited to talk to you. So this panel is really about trying to give you guys tips about the application process, MCAT, gap years, clinical hours, letters of rec, all of the things we wish we knew when we applied, and we want to impart onto you guys now. And yeah, I'll just let these guys introduce themselves, like name, hometown, where they went to, like post-secondary education, and if they took gap years and how many. So if you want to start.
Yeah, so my name is Taj Blow. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I went to college at Yale University and graduated in 2016. I took 3 years off to do research and just got here a couple months ago.
My name is Miguel. I'm originally from Venezuela. I went to Johns Hopkins and studied neuroscience and French, and now I'm here.
My name is Tequila. I'm from Queens, New York, and I just graduated from Columbia in 2019, so I didn't take any time off.
My name is Janicia. I'm from Bronx, New York. I went to Wesleyan University for undergrad and took 3 gap years. So I graduated in 2016 and I was doing research.
My name is Dan. I'm from Livingston, New Jersey. I went to Swarthmore College for undergraduate, and I graduated in 2017. And so I did 2 years up in Boston doing research before.
Hello, my name is Suting Liu. I go by Susie. I'm from Syracuse, New York, even though I was born in China. I went to Cornell University for undergrad, graduated this past year, and came here. And I was a human development major.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Haiti Paulino. I'm from Washington Heights, New York. I went to Hunter College, which is 3 blocks away from Cornell. And I graduated with a major in biology, took 2 gap years, and now I'm here.
Hi everyone, my name is Ryu. I'm from Houston, Texas, born and raised. I went to undergrad at Columbia University. I graduated in 2017, took 2 gap years, and in my time off, I worked as a medical assistant in Houston.
Hi guys, I'm Chisam, born in Nigeria. Moved around a lot, but right now my primary home is in Houston. I graduated from Columbia University in 2017 as well, and I took 2 gap years off working as a medical assistant.
Hi everyone, my name is Ikenna Onyekwere, also born in Nigeria, pretty much grew up in New Jersey. Took a different path, went to community college, and then transferred to Cornell University. I also graduated December 2018, so I took a semester off. I was working in communications, PR, a lot of creative stuff, and now I'm here at Cornell.
Thanks a lot, guys. Just make sure everyone speaks slowly and very clearly, because I don't know how good the microphone is here. I want to make sure everyone can hear us.
Awesome. So the first topic we're going to talk about is kind of the general timeline, when to apply. So talking about when you would submit your application, when you would do all of these things very broadly. We'll go into everything else in depth a little bit more afterwards too. So Tom, you can start again.
More capable. Something that was really helpful for me that I wish I had done more of was spending a bit more time looking online to see what questions from previous years had been asked, so I could do a little bit of writing and thinking about how I wanted to frame my essays, because the more you can do that up front, the less time you spend scrambling if you get 5 or 10 or however many secondary or primary applications. And I believe the earliest you can do that process is sometime in June, I think. June 1st, yeah. So certainly, like if you can take your MCAT earlier, you feel comfortable with either the score you get or the practice you've done, you can spend some time thinking about essays. I would shoot as hard as you can for this June 1st deadline, and then after that, the sooner the better.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. The advisors at my university really emphasize applying early, but I would say that it's not, a requisite that you apply the minute that it opens. I waited a couple weeks because I was traveling, and I felt that I had plenty of time. I would say that writing is a process that should be done repetitively, so I definitely started writing my personal statements and things like that previously in like January, and that definitely helped me have a strong finished product by the time that I was ready to apply it in late June.
Yeah, So I would say I could have definitely done my application process much more efficiently and better than I did. It's because I took the MCAT really late. I took it around I took it in the first week of July, and I submitted my app. So I think the biggest limiting factor for a lot of students is when you take your MCAT, because it's ideally you should see your MCAT score before you submit your application. So I submitted my applications without seeing my score, which is really risky, and I would not recommend doing it. It's extremely stressful. So instead, what you should do is aim to take your MCAT before May, and then before the May that you decide to apply. And then if you like your score, you feel like you're ready to submit. If you don't like your score, it gives you a little bit more time to take it in June. Again, if you do want to really apply that year. Yeah, but you definitely have to plan much ahead, because unlike if you guys are fresh out of high school or you guys are freshmen or sophomores in college, the college application process, you start really thinking about it in September, and then you have until you submit around January. So you take your SATs. You can still take your SATs in senior year, but you really have to start thinking about your med school application process almost a year in advance. Mm-hmm. So because the application cycle is happening during the summertime. So you have to start thinking about your MCAT, putting together your applications, asking for your recommendations the year before that summer. So if you do want to apply in your senior, if you want to go straight, for example, you have to start thinking about that in your junior year. And if you want to take one gap year, you have to start thinking about that in your senior year. So you really got to think about these things much more in advance to avoid a stressful application process.
Okay, I pretty much agree with everything everyone else said so far. So just starting early is pretty important. Another plug I would say is to request your letters of recommendation early, just to reach out to people that you think you might want to write for you, to suss out their availability. It can take months to hear back from folks, just to have them thinking about the fact that you might be applying, and to make sure that you request strong letters of recommendation, because that could be I don't say make or break thing, but that could be an important thing in between having a really great letter of recommendation versus an okay letter for someone who can't really advocate for you well, or speak highly on your behalf. So,
I guess like everyone said, I do agree with applying and starting early with everything. I think it's important to be proactive both in the things you can control, in terms of starting your MCAT early, and also things you can't control. Things like letters of rec that get delayed because maybe the professor's busy or something. So it's good to start much earlier than you'd expect with those things, in terms of asking, because sometimes people get busy and then you lose track of that letter of rec down the application cycle, and then you realize the school hasn't looked at your application yet because one of your letters of rec wasn't in. And so I just say be a little more proactive about making sure that things are going as going in the right sort of progression. I'm just making sure all your letters of recs are in, MCAT scores on MCAS and things like that as well, and transcripts as well from your school. So making sure that those are submitted in a timely fashion, because schools can be sort of slow with that as well.
I have two main things. So one, going to Cornell, it's a big school with lots of pre-meds, lots of pre-health people, and there is this thing called the pre-health evaluation committee, something like that, HCEC. Other schools have some similar types of committees, but they have their own timelines and they have their own deadlines. I forgot to send my money in by 1 day late, and my letter of rec was delayed by 2 months. So that's not good. You might want to just get on, make sure you have all those dates correct, and do all of the things required for your school, or your application will be delayed, unfortunately. Second thing is applying to med school and attending med school costs a lot of money. Yes, saving money is great. Also, there are programs out there to help you with this. So there's a fee assistance program that will help cover the cost of, say, some study materials, help subsidize the cost of the MCAT, help subsidize study materials themselves. There's also just school, and they'll also let you apply to, I think, 20 schools, I think, right now for free. Might be a little bit more, a little less, and you can reach out to the schools individually about secondary waivers, so you don't have to pay $2,000 to apply to med school in the first round. That also said, schools aren't as expensive as you would expect, especially the really good schools. I got into 2 medical schools, and one of the biggest reasons I came here is because it's actually cheaper than my state school, which doesn't make sense, but it's because we have debt-free tuition. Other schools might have like tuition free, so Kaiser, NYU's Long Island campus, they're tuition free. Other schools are debt-free, or they have really, really good financial aid that just makes medical school a very reasonable thing to accomplish.
Yeah, so also touching upon two things that were mentioned already, so I agree with everything. Something that Dan mentioned, which was the transcript. So I briefly went to a community college in Florida, and I'm obviously living here in New York, so I was like, how am I gonna get a transcript all the way from Florida? You know, I had to call the administration, email a bunch of people, or like utilize some, you know, their online portal system. So navigating that was a bit challenging, and just getting your transcripts from any secondary institution you've been to can also take a while. There might be like a small fee involved, you know, to mail it out, to get it, you know, stamped and approved and sent directly to like, you know, the AMCAS people, which, you know, you can't have it in your own hands. So that's also one thing you want to get ahead of. So that was a good point. And something that Susie also mentioned is the PE assistance program. So I initially applied, I mean, obviously last cycle, but I was thinking of applying the previous cycle, so the 2017-2018 cycle. And I was aware of the fee assistance program. I applied. It was a relatively simple process from what I remember. And I got approved. Everything was great. I had a discount for the MCAT. I had, I think it was about like 20 or like 15 schools that they were going to let me apply to. But then I decided not to apply. So when I applied the next year and I tried to get the fee assistance program, at this point I already had a job, you know, I was making more money. So they didn't approve me for the fee assistance program. So a part of me is like, darn, should I have applied the year before? But obviously I wasn't ready. My application wasn't as nice as it would have been the following year. So, so those are things that you have to consider and might play a role into when you apply and things like that.
Yeah, so just a couple things. We were talking earlier about requesting letters of recommendation. I recommend also having like a tiering system for the letters that you recommend, because like people have mentioned, it might take like months before you hear back from some professors or some people who are interested in having write letters for you. So like make sure you have like different tiers of people you think can vouch for you. And then second thing would be to keep in mind that it takes MCAS a while to process applications. Like it can take up to like a couple weeks. So I think you should factor that into whenever you apply. So when you apply, it's not like automatically your application is processed. It could be like 2 weeks from that your application is verified and processed. So applying earlier is better.
I also want to echo a lot of recommendations. So I would suggest also asking the people that you need. Because I had a few people fall through because they didn't reply or took them 3 months to get a letter in. And so luckily I already had 3 extra people that already asked me that letters had been sent for me already. And so I had that in my application, which prevented it from being delayed further because I was a late recommendation letter. And also with the essays, do aim for that June 1st deadline, but don't be nervous or angry if you don't meet that deadline. I had an essay done by June 1st, and I turned it into, so we had a writing tutor for the summer through Columbia, and I asked him what he thought about it, and he was like, well, it's a good start. And at that point, I was done. I was like, no, I cannot. And it was tragic because I was ready to submit. It was June 1st. I thought it was good to go. But over the next couple of weeks, I edited my essay again, went through it, and I had a stronger essay because of it. So even though I submitted 3 weeks later than I wanted to, it was a better and a stronger application. So aim for early, but don't be afraid to do yourself a few extras if you need it.
For me, I think I want to stress a few points. The first being, be very familiar with your school's process in terms of applying, because your school might have a specific way. For example, Susie mentioned that Cornell has the HVC where all the letters of recommendation goes through, and all the med schools know how other universities work. So if you kind of don't go through your school's process, that can be a red flag on your application. Another thing that I would say is seconding Taj's point about pre-writing all of your secondaries. There are forums, Reddit pages that you can find all of the previous year's essay prompts. So for me, I was actually in A250, which is where we have lectures. during last 2 summers ago, pre-writing all of my essays before I got the secondaries. And then also, because yeah, like we'll talk about pipeline programs later on. But another thing that I think is important, having gone to community college, like the infrastructure is different compared to four-year universities. So for me, I had to personally go to my school, fill out a form, pay a fee for them to mail my transcript in. So just know, like, keep track of all of your like credentials, know your school's process, and do everything as early as you can.
And one more thing about secondaries, work smarter, not harder. I reviewed so many essay prompts and bits and pieces from this essay and paragraph from that essay, add a few words, pick up some extra stuff to make that whole process a lot easier because you are writing a lot of essays.
Yeah. And also,
Change
it gets easier. I think one of the biggest things I recognized was if you're applying to a lot of schools, you do a lot of writing, and I would say the first half is the hardest feeling half because you're thinking of a bunch of new ideas to new questions. But once you get towards the latter third, let's say, you've been in the mode of answering questions in a under really tight word limit, you start seeing a lot of like good ideas and themes you developed from this first half. So it's really easy to see the strengths you've been able to articulate and how they weave together to answer different questions and prompts. So I definitely think the earlier you can front load that process to get your creative juices flowing, the easier, even if you get a brand new question on the line, you'll be able to put something together that you really enjoy in life.
Going along with that, I just want to add that, like, in that line, like, I will say, like, I think the first couple secondaries I submitted were sort of poor quality than my later ones. And so I would recommend sort of avoiding rushing through submitting secondaries, maybe take like extra couple days to maybe like get some of those creative juices flowing and then maybe revisiting it before finally submitting. Because most places do recommend like maybe like, you know, it depends on the school, but like, you know, 1 to 3 weeks in terms of when you should submit your secondary once you receive it. So just make sure you don't rush that process because you do have time. Schools are realize that you won't be able to like type out like an essay within like the next like few days. So just make sure you give yourself time to like get those creative juices flowing as well.
So if I could add, one very important thing in terms of financing your application, we've talked a little bit about the fee assistance program, but also I think it's very valuable to reach out to your school's diversity office because in my experience, they were able to supplement a lot of the cost of my traveling for interviews. So that's definitely something you should look into.
Awesome. So we've talked a lot about the general timeline now, and some people mentioned MCAT. So hopefully you guys know what the MCAT is. The MCAT is like this big exam you have to take for medical school. It's kind of like the SAT but worse, and encompasses a lot of undergrad. So I just wondered if you guys could talk a little about when to take it, tips and tricks, if you did any prep courses, how did you finance those prep courses if you ended up taking them?
For me, my first thought was, where would I get the most out of my studying? So I knew that if I studied for the MCAT at home, I would do terrible. So I studied while I was in school. So what I did was I overloaded my fall semester, like maxing out on like 20-something credits so I could take a really light spring, which is like the minimum credits you can read full time. And I was studying while I was taking classes. And in terms of taking the prep course, I took the Kaplan prep course, which was also funded through my school's diversity office because we have like some pre-med programs available to us. I would say that it's not necessary, but if you have the option to take it, it's very beneficial, especially if you're someone who has trouble with test taking strategies in terms of selecting the best answer to certain questions. Something I would also suggest is like, do as many questions as you can. One thing that was kind of challenging for me was that I wanted to get through the reading as fast as I could, but being that I was studying while I was in school, my days were reading mostly instead of reading and doing questions because I just didn't have time to read, do questions, study class material, and that. So if you have the opportunity, I would definitely say study where you think you can thrive the most and do practice questions while you are going to the review books.
So for myself, I studied for the MCAT after graduating college. And I didn't use a prep course. I was looking for $3.99. So I used a lot of online resources. I had some Kaplan books. I didn't get a set of one-step books from my school, but I didn't really use those. One thing I would also echo from McKenna is practice questions. Many practice questions. I had done content review, but I think where I grew the most was when I did the practice questions. And even with that, there is a strategy to how you review those questions. When I did a question, I would have an Excel sheet that would have the question number, what type of question it was, and I would write, why did I miss this question? What was I doing? Was I reading too fast? Did I not read the content? Did I misread a word? And that analysis, so breaking it down into these tiny subsections, really helped me see where I was falling short. So I could really pinpoint, okay, I'm having trouble with cars because I'm reading too fast. So I knew exactly what to fix in my studying, and then that really elevated my score above and beyond.
So I also took a prep class. I took the Kaplan self-paced class, which I think was the best for me. I think because I was I studied second semester senior year and a little bit after graduation, and I think for me, being able to offload and onload different study schedules based on my availability was best for me. But I think the thing I like the most about the self-paced course is that I could just jump into the material that I think I needed the most help on. I didn't have to go over everything. I think I did come from a place of privilege because I was still in school, so I was still in the school mode. So I think the further away you get from graduation, the more beneficial the prep courses would be for you. But to echo what Chisum said, what Kenna said, practice questions are key. You don't know, you might know it in your head, but it's only passive knowledge until you can find the right answer on the page. So I think I did. And if in terms of just timeline of taking the MCAT as early as possible, because Tequila mentioned this before, it kind of determines when you apply to med school. So if you can do it a year out, at least 6 months out, I think that'd be a safe bet.
So two things. In terms of when to take the MCAT, you have to keep in mind that there are registration dates. So I don't recall when I registered for my MCAT, but I remember I took mine May 17th. I remember the exact date of 2018. So, but it's not like you can go on their website a week before and you can register for your exam a week later. I ran into the issue where I wanted to take mine a little bit earlier, but that just happened to be the earliest date because all the early dates get filled up because everyone's thinking the same thing. Take it as early as possible so you can apply as early as possible so you can see your score as early as possible and so you can decide what you're going to do in case you don't do well or if you want to retake it. So keep in touch with the AMCAS website because they'll tell you when registrations open up for certain time slots and for certain months. And that might change year to year, so I can't give you an exact date. But yeah, stay on top of that. And as soon as those registrations open, at least log in to see what's available and kind of keep checking it every week, even if you're not ready to apply, just to see what's available in the long run. The second thing, I did take a prep course. I took the Princeton course. It was an in-person classroom style setting. I think we met on weekends, which was not awesome in the winter time. But to be honest, I personally didn't like it. I think the teaching was great, the content was great, but I didn't like the Princeton resources, the books and the questions. Only because when I started taking practice exams, not Princeton ones, it's the AAMC ones, they have a lot of resources. I realized that the level of difficulty of the questions were very different. So the Princeton questions were, to me, way too difficult. And the AMCAS questions, or the AAMC questions, were a lot more feasible and I could get those right a lot more than I could get the Princeton ones right. So I thought to myself, why am I stressing out over studying, or answering really, really difficult questions when the MCAT is probably not going to be this level of difficulty that I perceived. And so then I switched over to all AAMC materials. I bought all their question banks, their practice tests. I think at the time they had 4. And when I took the MCAT, I acknowledged and I realized that the AAMC material was way more reflective of the actual MCAT than Princeton was. I can't speak for Kaplan or other things, but AAMC for me was the way to go, just like utilize all their resources that they have online.
So I took the MCAT in the winter of junior year, and I went straight through. Some of my friends that took gap years took it in senior year after graduation. It expires in 3 years, I think, so you can use that score for quite a while. If you take it multiple times, they see all the scores. So the SAT way, like multi or super scoring, doesn't really work. But I did not take a prep course. I used Next Step and Altius. They have very good practice tests. I got 10 practice tests from those companies, and so if you buy the tests, you can use it 5 times. So if you get 5 people together, then you can each do it one time. But I didn't say that, so it's a nice way to save a little money. And then another resource I used was the Princeton Review books, which I sold after I used them, so you don't have to spend all your money on that. But the biggest thing is definitely practice tests. I took a practice test every other week. I reviewed it the other week and made sure I knew everything that I got wrong. And if there was a topic that I just did not understand, I looked that up in the Princeton Review book afterwards. I think that was the biggest thing that helped me with my score. I went up probably 15, 20 points for my first practice test. Really, really helpful. I do think the Altius and Next Step are the most representative of the actual test that aren't like actual AAMC material. They're more question understanding and like analysis, more like reading comprehension than Kaplan or Princeton Review, which are more just content knowledge. Like, do you know this fact? And I used the AMC or AMCAS material for the last month that I was studying. I was also starting a new job, so I just kind of would do some like studying practice tests on my days off, and then do like the AMC practice tests the week before. And I think there's a random, fun, interesting study tool that people don't talk about. So there's a subreddit called r/MCAT, which was shut down briefly, but it's back up now. It's really helpful. It's not something you think would be helpful, but it's really helpful. Also, r/PrIMES, also really helpful. They have, we all know what Anki is. So Anki spelled ANKI, is a flashcard app. You spray on your laptop, you have to pay money on your phone, but use the laptop one for now. You can buy pre-made flashcard decks about MCAT questions. So the psych-social portion or some of the biology, chemistry portion, there's pre-made cards. You don't have to make your own, and they're very comprehensive, and it'll really help you read the score and nailing down those little definitions.
I don't want to repeat too many points, but I just want to re-emphasize like the practice test as well. Not just taking the practice test, but kind of emulating like a test environment. So I think the biggest thing about the MCAT that people don't really expect, unlike the SAT and like other like standardized tests, is that it's very long. It's like longer than any test you've ever taken because it's 7 hours. It's like about 6 to 7 hours long essentially. And so you really want to carve out maybe like a full day to like take a practice test in like practice test setting. And related to that, the AAMC practice test, one of them is free. Having that sort of electronic interface to practice on as well, like because the actual electronic interface has a highlighter thing and like the buttons are in weird places. So just getting used to that sort of format before you enter the real actual MCAT test you're taking is very, very helpful.
I agree. I can't remember if all the practices are free.
No.
Just one. So if,
Absolutely not.
so if you get the fee assistance program, you get everything.
No,
For
if you
the
get
3.
that, you get two practice tests free. You get their, so you have to pay for 2 more. I would recommend doing that. And you also get, they have something called a section bank, which has very difficult questions. That comes free. But they have question banks, and you have to pay for those if you get that. Yeah.
Oh, they changed it then because when I applied, I thought they were all free.
For Kaplan, it comes with the package.
Yeah.
So question banks, I have to pay for
Okay, so it must
yeah,
have
the
changed.
section banks is free.
Okay. Maybe those are resources that you can use. So if you're eligible with resources, you should apply for that. Everything everyone else said, I agree with. I would say in terms of timing of MCAT, just like leave enough time in case you don't do as well as you anticipated, so you can take it again. applied in the summer of 2018. So I took my MCAT twice. So I took it first in September 2017 and then in April of 2018. And I think the biggest difference for me in terms of what everyone else already sort of restated was just like doing more practice questions. The first time around, I solely read like all through all the books. I was like, I got this. That makes sense. I was like, no. So I think doing the questions the second time around is really helpful. Also, since there's only 3 practice exams for AMC now. Four. Okay. So I would also like make like custom like half-length practice tests from like the section bank materials and like the question packs, and that was also helpful too when I kind of ran out of stuff and was a little bit more used to seeing the same stuff over and over. So that helps to sort of diversify stuff. And if you can get access to more than just the AAMC materials for practice tests, like doing as many different ones as possible, I think is helpful.
So for the MCAT, I didn't really have any prep class, so I relied on like free resources that I got. So I would, if you are really tight on money, I would say the only thing the most necessary thing I would invest in is all of the MCAS resources. And hopefully you'll qualify for the PAP. So in total, that costs around like $200 with those resources. And then there's a lot of ways to get access to more practice tests. I would say on average, most people take about 10 practice tests. So if you count the 4 that you get through MCAS, it's about 6 more. Next Step has 1 free practice test that's full line. And then I also got access to 3 free Princeton ones and 3 free Kaplan ones. If you get the book, as long as you have like the ISBN number, you can use that to get access to more practice tests. So in total, that's like 10 practice tests, which you only paid for the MCAS ones. Another thing that I would suggest is schedule, like be very, I guess, scrupulous about planning your study time. So like I studied sort of sporadically throughout my spring semester of senior year, and then I had like 4 weeks after graduation to really buckle down. And I would say I didn't really get much studying done until those 4 weeks that I had after junior year, sorry. So like I took a practice test during my spring vacation and I didn't like my score, and then I did like content review throughout junior year, and then I took a practice test after that, and my score still was more or less the same. So that also proves to you like when you make your study schedule, plan less time for like strict content review and much more time for like the actual practice questions. And what I did is like I made a calendar of like the 4 weeks that I had, and I was like, I'm gonna take AMC 1 on this week, Next Step on this week, like sprinkle between, because like as Haiti mentioned, nothing is more realistic than the AMC exams, but like you only have 4 exams, so you don't want to take them all in the beginning. So maybe like go between AMC and also like Princeton or Kaplan. And it's also good not to get used to just one resources, because all the test prep companies are very different, and you don't want to get stuck to their way of testing. So and another thing is like after doing my content review over the spring break, I took over spring semester of junior year, I took like 1 practice test, and I saw like, oh, these are all the points that I was weak at. And then it's not like you're only doing content review for those 4 weeks. And let's say you got a bad score on your second practice test. Don't panic and go back to just reading the books again. Instead, what I would do is like, okay, I did really poorly on the Krebs cycle questions. Then find access to like, I use this book called Princeton Hyperlearning. If you buy it used, I got mine for like $10, and it's like a really thick book, and it has they have almost like 500 passages, and they organize them based on topic. So it's like I'm really weak at the Krebs cycle, then I would do like 5 passages just on that, or I'm really weak on hydrostatic or like fluid physics, and then I would do lots of practice questions on that. So keep on building your skills based on like choose 1 question bank or practice question bank that's really you find really helpful to like just remember the facts and also apply the skills. Another thing I would emphasize is like now the MCAT is geared much more towards scientific reasoning than knowing the facts. So when you, especially for the biology, so there's 4 sections of the MCAT. There's reading, critical CARS, which is like just similar to the reading comprehension, the verbal section of the SAT, but I would say it's much more difficult. So I would do a few passages every day throughout your study period. The other section is a biochemistry and biology section, but it's much more biochemistry based now. So rather than physiology, so I actually didn't take a physiology class. So that's probably where I lost most of my points on MCAT, but I did take, like, you should take biochem ideally before you take the exam. And the other sections is psych soc, and the other is chemistry physics. So especially for chem phys and the biochem bio section, it's much more knowing how to read a graph, like experiment. They'll throw lots of experiments at you. Being able to read those graphs and interpret what it's saying, and also can you read a passage, a scientific passage, and know what the scientists are doing? What is the hypothesis they're doing? So I know some kids, some of the students that I tutored, they were really good at like knowing the knowledge, but they didn't know how to read, like think about it experimentally. So what they did was actually do ACT science passages, and that just helped them get in the thought of like, how do I read a graph? So that's really helpful. So if you find that like, this is an exam that you can't use brute force. It's not like the more I study, the more time I invest, the better I score. It's like you have to be able to figure out where your weaknesses are and really work towards that.
Yep. I don't want to belabor the points that were already made, but just 3 highlights that were really important for me. First, that there's no good time to take the MCAT. I took mine in May in the middle of finals period, and I graduated a week later, which is the most stressful thing in the world. But I will say that the most important thing for me was to vary my studying, which is the second highlight. I used a ton of different resources after I had completed my content review. That way I would not just get bored with the material, because I could only flip through those 7 books for so long. So I definitely am a proponent of the flashcards, of the question banks. You'd be surprised how many tests are available from students in the grades above you that are free. And then eventually you'll have to end up paying for the ones that the AMC releases every year. But the thing that nobody will tell you is that you need to take anywhere from 8, 10, full length practice exams, and sitting down to do those is really where you just see huge increments in your score. I'll throw a plug in there for something that hasn't been mentioned yet. I used a podcast pretty casually that is called the MCAT podcast by Next Step Test Prep. And it's just 2 guys that chat about random MCAT topics, and I would have it playing like while I was in the shower and stuff. So I made it a point that I was constantly studying, either passively or actively, but just trying to keep my mind fresh and engaged.
Yeah, so there are a few things that I think were important to my process. And I think one of the most important aspects was taking your exam when you're ready, with as much or as little time as your financial situation allows for. There might be a lot of people who have tons of resources, people who support their families, people somewhere in between. But I think, and this gets into why I think gap year is important, a lot of MCAT studying relies on a self-directed and self-driven process of identifying your strengths, your weaknesses, and how to move forward. And I think for many people, you can go through a lot of your academic career up to this transitionary point and have people shunt you into the things that you're doing. Everybody, mom's always say go to college, dad always say go to college, I'm here, I'm doing these things. And you don't have to think about someone giving you an assignment, they give you an assignment. And you're not going to have, generally, until you pay money for it, but to be as successful as you can be, I think it really requires you to constantly do this reflection and re-examination and say, what am I weak at, and how am I figuring that out, and how do I move forward? And I think taking time to figure out what that looks and feels like for you is really important. And that was something that was really, really important for me. I took 2 academic calendars off and put my application in sometime in the middle of this 3rd academic calendar. But I tried a prep test the first time right after I graduated from school, and it was awful. I didn't have the focus. It was a 3-hour online self-paced class, and I was just not absorbing anything. And after a couple of weeks, I just fell off the wagon, and I decided, I'm not going to take the exam. So it wasn't until I had spent more time living and thinking and just exercising my own self-directed abilities in other avenues of my life, that I had a better grasp on, if I'm determined in doing something, what does that look like to me, and what are the things that I do to keep myself mentally healthy, physically healthy, to embark on this marathon. So that leads to my second feeling about this process, which is that it is a marathon. Whether it's a marathon that you're putting in many, many hours over a short period of time, or it's a marathon where you're extending your studying for 3, 4, 8, 12 months, this is a very long process. And you really want to make sure that you have a lot of the resources and support systems, as many as you can gather for yourself, to encourage you and keep you motivated to do that. In my particular case, I got a lot of anxiety when I compared myself to how other people were doing. And you can find, like kind of as you were saying, a lot of like online communities where you can get information. One of the tips or tricks that I would say is be very selective about what you put your energy into, because there's a lot of frenetic energy that surrounds people on these forums saying, oh, you know, I got a 521, but I'm not sure if that's like the best score for me. Should I just cancel my score, throw it out and study again? And it can be really easy to just delegitimize yourself and your work. This is your process. There's no race, and I think taking the time off to like introspect really helps separate you from the almost rat race feeling you can get in college, where you have to get into school as soon as humanly possible so that you can get out as soon as humanly possible. I also think that I can very strongly with Jesus said, practice test and your test review process are critical. I also had like a Google sheet in my case, but a breakdown of what went right, what went wrong. Part of it is just to encourage yourself when you get something right that you're struggling on. It's really good to reaffirm yourself and say, I didn't get this right, and I can look back and say, I didn't get it right before. I'm growing. It's also really important to know like what study strategies are working and what aren't. If you decide between one practice test and another that you're going to use Khan Academy to learn something, and it comes really intuitively, that's how you can start to fine tune this resource for this section in this way is really helpful for me. And that's something that also comes with some time. I think a third aspect, and I won't go on too much longer, a third aspect is just giving yourself the time to get into a new schedule. My last month of MCAT studying was something like 9 hours a day, just like grinding things out. But my first month of studying was like 45 minutes of studying. And it took me about 3 months to really just like understand what studying frequently looked like and felt like. I need to allow time for that. I need to allow time to develop my review method and time to develop what research worked for me. So you can certainly do it. I have friends who've done it in 3 months. If that's like the speed you can go at, more power to you. But just give yourself the time that you need to grow in the process. The last thing, just about like resource that I use, I really, really, really highly recommend UWorld as a resource. This was something I didn't find until the very last 2 weeks. Unfortunately, gave me a 15-day like free trial with like full access. So it was like 1,500 questions. The Reddit groups are r/MCAT and r/PrIMES for the person who just asked that question. That's r/MCAT and r/PrIMES.
And we'll post all of the like resources in the
I love UWorld. The thing I love most about it was that it gave you a really comprehensive answer for why the right answers were right and why the wrong answers were wrong. And I think understanding both of those things is critical to really enhancing in an efficient way your growth through the process. The second tip and trick that I would give is take as many practice tests as early on as you can and really lean into the test and not into the fear of I haven't practiced enough for the practice tests. You will never know what you're starting with and what you need to work on without doing that. And that fear of not doing as well on the practice you need to can really limit the way that you spend your time and energy growing. And then the final thing is that I think a lot of people have mentioned it, shop around. There's no perfect way to study for the MCAT. The perfect way is the way that works best for you. In my case, I did some like Kaplan review books, and I would just set my week up so that I'm taking an exam, and I really struggled with cars and physics. So I do a different session every day, focus on my growth in cars and physics, and if something didn't go well, go on Khan Academy and just watch a video to understand the concept. or literally go online, type up, how do I do, I'm throwing a ball, business questions. Like, you really want to be flexible in the way that you build up your experience. You don't have to start at the hardest MCAT question. You just have to keep on iteratively gaining knowledge. And those are the things that were responsible, at least in my opinion, for a really huge growth in where I started from to where I ended up.
Awesome. So I hope you guys know a little bit more about the MCAT now. We spent a good amount of time, so I'm going to have to hustle people in the next two. So I'm going to combine two of the topics since a lot of them are related. So about clinical hours and gap year. So who here did a gap year? Just raise your hand. Okay. Who here didn't do a gap year? So gap years are really common. It's a scary thing to think about when you're a freshman, sophomore in college, but it's very, very normal. Some of our classmates are like in their late 20s or 30s. And who here, in terms of like their gap year, did research? Master or medical assistant, scribe. Yeah, so people do a lot of different things, and we'll talk about a little bit more. And then in terms of clinical hours, how many people shadowed clinical hours? Kind of a little scribing. I was a scribe, medical assistant, for clinical hours. Yeah. So we can just talk about, if you guys can talk about clinical hours a little bit, and if you took a gap year, what you did, how long you did it for, why you did it, what you think you gained, all of that combined.
Do you guys maybe want to make it a little more open for discussion, or
Yeah.
just we're short on time? It's up to you.
Yeah, it's like, back and forth.
Okay, so for me, I don't truly see the value of shadowing in terms of like just following someone around and not doing anything. It's a great way to kind of see the field, but 500 hours of shadowing to me won't make you in the basic position. I feel like it's one of the boxes that must be checked for sure, since other applicants are doing that. So I definitely did it, but I didn't really feel that it was the most meaningful thing in my application. I volunteered a lot in the emergency department, which I thought was really valuable in terms of me directly interacting with patients, giving them sandwiches, giving them juice, transporting them to X-ray, MRI, echo, and like actually talking to nurses, doctors, different people in the healthcare field. And I thought that was way, way more valuable than following a physician around. So now kind of like talking about my gap year really quick. So, I took a gap semester. I actually graduated late. I graduated December 2018. So while I was an undergrad, I was involved in a social justice program, which let undergraduate students teach a course. So we were in pairs teaching our colleagues, our fellow students. So they hired me full time to do a lot of creative work, so logo design, videography, photography, because I had a pretty creative background, fashion work. So I was doing that and then also teaching a course. And it was a great time, like learning about social justice topics such as like finances, socioeconomic status, race, gender, all these things.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that you adding all these things together in terms of what you do your time off is a game of inches, I guess. I didn't do any clinical experience before coming to school. It was something I was certainly worried about. I think something that's really important for how these things impact your application is, one, does it help you answer either personally or in your essays why you want to be a doctor more than someone who just does health-related things. Shadowing is usually a good way to separate somebody who wants to be an EMT or a nurse from someone who says, like, this particular role in the healthcare field I want to do. But if you can answer that question in other ways, at least in my experience, it didn't end up being a deal breaker for coming here. The second thing is that I tried to really unpack, especially when I was applying, like the different things that go into an application, and if I'm applying later and I'm older, but I'm coming from the school that I'm coming from, what does it all mean? I was very nervous about my application because I had like a 3.12 coming out of Yale, and people were always telling me, oh yeah, you're gonna get this like bump up from where you're coming from, and I was really concerned, especially if you go online, you look at a lot of these averages for schools and they're like 3.7, 3.8, 3.97. So particularly without having clinical experience on my resume, I was really concerned about what was qualifying and disqualifying. It ended up being, in my experience, that being able to talk passionately about the self-directed things that you've done, whether that's spending a lot of time doing research, spending a lot of time doing community service, being a scribe, being able to answer this critical question of everybody wants to help somebody, why do you need to do it this way, is I think the single most important question. You want to make sure that whatever time off or extra privilege you do helps you come to a unique, personalized answer about why this is the best fit for you.
So for me, I went straight through. I didn't take a gap year, didn't take a semester. I think I realized I really wanted to apply to med school by the middle of my junior year. And going to school in Ithaca and living in Syracuse, there is very little opportunity to shadow, to do volunteer work, to do pretty much anything clinical. As a result, I had no clinical hours from college at all until I started as a medical scribe. So actually to that position, a month or two before I took the MCAT, so at the end of my junior fall, I applied, somehow got it, and I just took, I worked Monday, Wednesday, Friday during business hours. I only had classes Tuesday, Thursdays, and evenings, weekends on that coming spring, and then I worked from probably December until the end of that summer. So I was a medical scribe for about 8 to 9 months at my farm. I just went to work, but that's how I got my clinical hours in. It's not ideal. Ideally, you would start doing it earlier, volunteering, maybe shadowing if you could do that. Doing maybe if you took a gap year, you could do medical assistant or scribe again. It really is something that helps a lot with applications, but is not necessary. So for me, I needed that since I had none of it, and that's just how it worked out. I do wish I took a gap year. It would have been nice to have a little bit more time to rest and do stuff, but I'm lucky that the physician I worked with, I was more of a private scribe in an internal medicine office. I got a great exposure to medicine, and he also wrote me a last minute letter back. I needed 3 and I had 2. Talk about their gap years.
About mine. So Rita and I actually worked in the same office during my gap years, which is a lot of fun. And so we were medical assistants, and I think that provided a unique experience. So like Kenna said, shadowing isn't really the most efficient way to get the clinical experience. I mean, it is part of the application process, and people feel like it's like a check mark off their list, but I feel like finding a place where we can really be more involved, whether that's giving out sandwiches. We actually worked at where we were working, so we did EKGs, we would give shots, we would room the patients, run some tests with them.
Did you have a license? I think that's an interesting question because a lot of people think
I was the lesson giver.
Yeah.
So we all. So okay, so to be a medical assistant, most times you have to get a certification. But in Houston, there's this thing where if you train at the site, they can count that as your certification.
You trained for 3 hours? No, 4 weeks unpaid.
Yeah, 4 weeks unpaid. Yeah, that was rough.
So no, I just wanted to clarify because I worked as an MA too, and I think it's sometimes a barrier if people don't know that can I be hired as an MA? I don't have a license. So there are scenarios where
you don't need a license to work.
That can be your job title.
Yeah.
You might not be able to give shots or things that need certificates, but certainly make sure you communicate with the employers and hiring departments, and they'll let you know exactly what you can do because there's a lot out there.
Yeah, I think our clinic was a little different because it was a really small clinic. There was just one doctor and one nurse practitioner. She was an internal medicine doctor or family practice actually. Yeah. So we had a lot of responsibility, which was a good and a bad thing. I think we got to see a lot of different sides to medicine, the good, the bad, the nice patients, the not so nice patients.
And we learned ahead of time how to sort of begin that process of mentally learn how to communicate with people who weren't always the easiest patients. But I think we romanticize medicine so much, oh yeah, I'm so grateful and so happy that I'm here. But people are going through tough stuff, and so that might reflect in how they talk to you or treat you. And you as a physician have to be able to mentally compartmentalize that and realize they're going through a tough time. Let me speak to them in this way or act in this manner towards this patient.
And even on a more a more large scale level, we all want to be doctors to help people.
Yeah.
But nobody tells us what happens when you can't help them. Yeah. How do you deal with that? And I think that's something that we're faced with. We get a lot of patients who
couldn't afford
medications, despite all intervention, weren't getting better. Yeah. And just learning how to deal with that, or being just faced with that, being in that atmosphere was something I think was definitely strengthened my like desire to pursue medicine.
And it's also really tough, like just to realize that, you know, like even though you're putting your best effort, you go into GoodRx, we'll get some medications, you're trying to pair them with doctors who will take fee waivers or payment programs. Like, you realize how many barriers there are to people getting good medical care that you didn't realize beforehand before you started to work real time with these patients. And it's tough. It's tough when you realize how many things exist that prevent people from getting good health care.
I think on that topic, I'll go ahead and just give my spiel. I worked for a year as an MA in clinical research, a little bit on the side of that. But as long as you're doing something you care about, I think one of the most important things you can get out of your gap year, besides giving yourself a little reprieve, is really just seeing what healthcare is all about beyond being a doctor. Some of the most valuable things I learned were from people who scheduled appointments and social workers. I learned how to call up an insurance company and give them billing codes and things and find out kind of what the bureaucratic process is like. And that just gives you a much more realistic and holistic view of medicine and all the things that come attached to that. So as long as you're doing something that you care about, whether it's in healthcare or teaching, it'll always give you some kind of perspective on why you want to be a physician in the end.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have talked about, like, my experience with the healthcare system or my research has given me X, Y, or Z insight about the actual practice of medicine. And I think it's important to recognize that the admissions committees for the schools you're applying to, they're made of people and they're made of intelligent people. So it's very easy to see through even a well-written, stacked resume that does not convey authenticity. And if you are, we have someone here at school who is on the business committee who asks questions like, how should I advocate on your behalf to the rest of the business committee? That's not a question that flashing a bunch of names is going to help answer, because you're all going to be successful people. You all have very unique experiences. You're going to be in a pool of a bunch of other people with a bunch of amazing stories and experiences. People are much more concerned, at least in my opinion, when you get to that interview step about, are you someone who is like eager to learn? Are you someone who, even if you hit a lot of roadblocks, that you are really focused on what's important to you? And these things can come from a variety of experiences, but it's critical that they're authentic experiences. You can talk with a great deal of respect to what you've done or for the people you were serving. And I think that should always be an undercurrent in whatever you're doing, research, EMT work, or otherwise, so that you can extract that out of that experience.
So someone mentioned EMT thing. Does anybody want to comment? Can anybody comment on that? I know some people did EMT work before medical school. We can't necessarily speak on that, but it definitely is a really good experience, and it is clinically oriented.
And if you're passionate about it, do it. If it's not something you're passionate about, it don't feel like you need to jump in the back of an ambulance.
So I did EMT training, but it's like a really long process.
Exactly.
Yeah. So only do it if you're like willing to, do the work after. Like the training process is long, and then you should, because you trained for so long, you should be able to do it for like a certain amount of time. Because at that point, like work enough as an EMT, then it's not worth it. Because it is a lot of money for that process as well. It's its own standardized exam. So just make sure you're aware of that.
Speaking of that, just really quick, maybe a couple you can comment. One worry or concern about taking a gap year for a lot of students is the financial issue, because they're living on loan money and then suddenly it's gone, and they can't just volunteer full time necessarily. They have to worry about making money as well. So I know some of you guys mentioned opportunities like MA and things like that, and some, and other ones, but can someone just briefly comment on which ones are also a way to get the important clinical experience while also being able to use it as a job? And instead of having to work on the side at Starbucks or something, it doesn't really help you.
Yeah, so I think this is where networking was important for me, because when I was 2 semesters away from graduating, so my fall semester, there were a lot of post-bac students in my school, like older students that had jobs, had families, had their own apartments. And I got a job working at NYU, the Bellevue Hospital here in New York City, through one of my classmates, actually. They were looking for someone bilingual. They had a really good community-based research project. And I got kind of lucky in that sense where I started a position that required you to have your bachelor's completed. But they just needed someone so badly that they were willing to onboard me as a temp and then part-time, and then I transitioned to full-time. And I was getting paid during all those steps. So even as a temporary employee, I was getting paid. And this is where I gained my research experience. So I did community-based research. I got involved through the same hospital in like also bench work. So that's like your typical pipetting, going into a lab, centrifuge, all that stuff that you do like in regular lab in undergrad. So I got exposure to a lot of different things. That's where I kind of also build up my resume to be able to apply to med school the second time around. Because you remember I told you the first time around I had zero experience, I wasn't even ready. But then the second time around, I had a lot more to say during my work and experiences section, which is part of the AMCAS application. I think they give you maximum 15 things to write about. So I was able to extrapolate like 3 different things from each experience and then break it down into like what I learned in 3 different ways. So I kind of like, I learned a lot. That's my point. So yeah, I would recommend, looking at hospitals in the area, like near your school, like start with that first. Because a lot of hospitals have research going on, like whether it's clinical, bench work, community-based, and if there's an institution nearby, like an undergraduate institution, they know that a lot of students are looking for, employment after college or something like that. And don't be afraid to go the temporary route. Because technically you are going to be working there temporarily until you apply to med school. And like for me, that turned into actual employment, part-time then full-time. So if they like you enough, if you do a good job, if they have the funding, then they may keep you on. So just try to apply through all those positions. Yeah.
And be honest with that, I feel like people understand that we don't have to work for free. Yeah. We have to pay rent, you have to feed yourself, buy groceries, things like that. So be transparent about that, and if it's not realistic for you, then there's no reason to, kind of make that sacrifice because it's not fair. So know your worth. Because I know that was a big for me.
No.
Did you guys use Handshake?
Yeah.
Concretely, Handshake is a job search platform for different universities. I'm not sure if the New York schools are connected through that, but they might have some iteration of it. Okay, so. Handshake is just a portal. You upload your CV. There's a ton of pre-med related jobs, and most of them are paid positions, so you can search that way.
Like my situation was a bit different, being that I graduated in December. So like the timing for like my loan repayment, things started kicking in earlier. So I knew that I needed to make actual money, and kind of like. Piggybacking off of what Haiti said, like use your personal connections and relationships with people to get you a job. Like I mentioned earlier, I was doing this thing as an undergrad and they hired me full-time to do it. And the pay was great. And it was like a different, like in terms of it not being directly clinically related, it was more so like education-based, but on the side, I was able to do things with the public health school and Cornell on-campus hospital. Writing case studies for certain workshops with the physicians and nurses. So there's like a lot of different ways that you can still be connected to the medical field without directly working in the medical field. But definitely if you are like more financially conscious, be very wary of like how much money you're going to be making and how much time you're going to be working.
Yeah, just the 2 quick things I want to add. 1, check to see if your school has or gives students access to alumni networks, because everybody's going to a school that has people who've done something like this before and know to do that before. And that can be a really good way to use a built-in network that you guys have something very similar in common. So you can say, hey, I'm interested in doing work here or there, this, that, whatever. And the second aspect is if you are considering taking a job so that you can fund your gap year or gap years, which obviously many of you need to do, make sure you build time into your job search in addition to the other things you're considering, because it took me 6 months before I started hearing trickles of answers back, and it's not something you can do in 2 months while you're studying for your finals and studying for your MCAT and have everything just coalesce in that way. That's very rare in my experience.
Okay, thank you.
do people have any comments about letters of recommendation? So like, who did you ask? When did you ask? Any comments you want to touch on?
Oh, I can bring up something. So when you're applying to schools, each school has a certain requirement for recommendation letters. Sometimes they want you to have 2 from science, 2 from one research person, 2 from a non-science mentor. So when you're asking for letters, make sure you look at the school that you want to apply to and see what the requirements are. Because one school I applied to through the first primary application, I couldn't apply to during the secondary because I didn't have the right letter of recommendation. So make sure you look at that when you're looking to your schools.
Also, if you're in, if you're an MD PhD applicant, which I'm an MD PhD student, every single research experience that you've ever had or are planning to report, you need a letter of recommendation. That is, it's a red flag if you don't have one.
Something that consistently came up during my interviews about my letters were how well the people explain my character. So I think it's very important to have people who really know you as a person. And that kind of gets thrown around a lot, like ask someone who knows you, but it's like, ask someone who you can have a conversation with that's not even related to your school courses. Like someone you can just walk into the office, how's your day going, how's your family? They ask you about those things as well. That's very important. And then in my preference for my letter writers, I definitely wanted someone who not only spoke about my character, but also having a letter that spoke about my research ability. I felt as though transferring to Cornell, my research lab was kind of my first sense of community on campus. So I thought it was very important for me to have my PI write me a letter.
Yeah, I just want to build off of that. Authenticity here more so than any other space, and like the single factor is so important. If you ask anybody in this room, write a nice sounding rec letter, almost everybody can figure out what words sound good on paper. It's very different, the feeling and image that someone's writing evokes when they really care and are advocating on behalf of somebody. And you can't mimic that, you can't buy that, you can't really forge that. So I think it's really important to find people, spend time earlier, especially if you're in college, go to office hours, whatever. Find people who, by the time you're applying to school, like I kind of said, you can ask them like, how's your sister, how's your kids, how are things going at home, how was Christmas? Because these are the people, one, that just means a lot to them because they have a bunch of other things going on and you take interest in that. But 2, they will go to bat for you. And the second aspect is, be really thoughtful about who falls in the category of people who know you, who can be useful. A lot of people err on the side of the biggest name that I can include in my application is the best for me. And like, there's some like correlation utility there, but I asked the grad student who was working with me on my very first project, who saw me go through probably like the most costly professional failure that I had made in not being able to like fabricate materials for my project. And he spoke almost exclusively in talking about like what he wanted to focus on, about the way that like I responded to that struggle in the lab in like a real professional setting, and the difficulty that comes with that. And I think that was way more valuable as a letter recommendation than someone writing, Taj was phenomenal at, showing up on time or something like that. That's important, but like him talking about my actual day-to-day on the ground experience and how I like overcame the struggles that I was working against, that was a really strong sentiment that carried very well and tracked very well over my interview trail.
Awesome. So some of the more nitty-gritty audience questions we'll answer afterwards and thread in a doc. But we have a couple of more random miscellaneous questions. So first one's about pipeline programs. So who here did a pipeline program of some sort? Awesome. And of those were like, they just MD, PhD?
MD and dentistry.
Okay, so if you guys could talk a little bit about your experiences, what you did and how it helps.
So I was actually involved in 2 different pipeline programs. So the first main one was through my state school, medical school in Newark, New Jersey. And that program was a three summer program. So you completed one step and moved on. And they pretty much, at that time, I was like still in community college, and I felt as though like they were the most supportive of my pursuit of medicine. Like coming from a community college, a lot of people didn't really take me seriously when I said that I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to go to med school. And I remember like the first day of the program, everyone has to like say what school they're from. And I was the only person in community college in the whole audience of like 100 and something. So that was one experience. And like having a pipeline program is a huge benefit, especially if that's the school that you wanted to go to. At that time, when I was in community college, I never knew that I would get into Cornell. I was very focused on just getting into my state school. But things changed. And then also, I'm like, but then also, so then like I met Nancy, who recently retired, at a workshop at my other pipeline program, and she just swooped me up. And then I came to Weill for the summer of 2018, and I was here with a lot of other people who were in the similar program for different years, and did the Weill summer program, which is called Travelers, and now I'm a student here.
What is Travelers? What is Travelers?
Travelers is a summer research fellowship. So what we do is mainly research, so you can do basic science or clinical research. And in addition to that, you take a course on cardiology, right? Cardiovascular diseases. And it's like, not cardiology, but like cardiovascular. And then also, it's a great way to kind of meet. So like one of the great things about these pipeline programs is that you kind of build personal relationships with people who are on admissions or who work here, or even people who just open the door for you. Like a lot of the people who work in the Olin dorm, they know me, they know my brother, they know my sister, because we've all kind of come through this place at some point in our lives. So it's really great for meeting people and feeling more connected to the school that you're going to go to.
I can do the same. I also did the same college program. I was the year of 2016. And you do meet a lot of people that I know here now. I knew when I came in 2016 for Travelers. I've known Liz for 4 or 5 years. And you meet a strong cohort of people around you in your class. And to this day, I'm still good friends with a lot of people in my cohort. And so you create a lot of great relationships with people, new colleagues, and just a great environment to be vulnerable, to have a space to specifically for people of color and underserved communities to explore what it looks like to be in a medical setting, and to just have that support that you not necessarily have all the time, to say, you got it, you can do it, we're here, we're rooting for you. And it's so pivotal to have that mentorship, because a lot of times when I wasn't sure I could do it myself. And so to have people behind you who've gone through the process, who know what it's like to say, you can do it, and I know you can, and I believe in you, meant a lot.
Yeah, I can totally echo that. I did a summer program at UNC Chapel Hill. This was the MED program, and it was phenomenal. This was something that genuinely gave me the confidence to apply to school and to broaden my horizons for what I thought was possible for myself. It's really like what Chisholm said, it is an incredibly affirming experience to have people who are personally invested in you as opposed to invested in you as a member of school A, B, or C. And that difference is very tangible. And if you have more people like that in your corner, you can just do a lot of really amazing things. So this program was run by previously run by Cedric Bright, Lisa Long, and Claudius Polk. It happens every year. They take applications for either juniors who are STEM focused or seniors who have recently graduated. And there is a $800 per 3-week stipend for the program as well.
So I did the Gateways to Laboratory program, which is also run by Weill Cornell, and it's the MD PhD version of Travelers, essentially. This was about 10 weeks long, and now they've bumped the stipend to $6,000. And they also don't, you don't have to take, none of that money goes to your housing, so all of that money goes to you and your living expenses, which is not, I didn't get nearly as much money, and I also had to pay for the rent using my stipend. So definitely apply. The application deadline is the first week of February if you can. And I would say, sort of going off what Ikenna and Chiefs said, but the Gateways program was definitely like I would not have been able to go straight if it wasn't for the Gateways program. They, another thing they give you is they give you a big SIP, which is a current MD PhD student, and I still talk to him all the time. He helps me with like getting through, since he also was an MD-PhD student here, he helps me like give me advice through like getting through my med school classes, but he was also like huge in my application process and strategizing my junior and senior year and my when to apply, who should I ask for a recommendation. And also my PI, he is also, so Gateways to Laboratory program, you do mostly research, but you do like some shadowing on the side. I did, my PI was an MD-PhD who graduated from this program, the Cornell's MD-PhD program. So he let me shadow, and also I did research in his lab, and he advocated extraordinarily for me. Like even I remember during my interview application, like during the interview over here, all the students were nervous, and then he just came up to me and sat next to me and like kind of helped me. So like the people you meet in these programs are like phenomenal, and they're super invested in you. Almost every medical school has a pipeline program. So I would spend like my winter vacation doing research on these pipeline programs. For Gateways, you can only apply, unfortunately, after you can do it twice, but you can apply as many times as you want, but you can only do it as a like at the end of your freshman year or at the end of your sophomore year. So I think that's what most of you guys are. So I think it works out. But almost every medical school has a pipeline program. So spend your winter vacation like working on applications for those. And I would apply to like maybe 10, and then you sometimes get back from like 1 or 2. But like, don't take that offensively. Like these programs are really hard to get into, but they're not really. They can be challenging, but like, don't let anything get in the way of applying them because they give you the best resources. Yeah.
Awesome. So we have one more question. Time for basically one more. So there's always the what if I didn't go to an Ivy League school? Like what if I went to like a community college or a state school versus my like these fancy other schools? So we have a couple people here from just different schools, even though we are relatively Ivy League as an institution. So I just wondered if you could talk about your experiences, anything you think is specific to your school or your situation, any tips for these guys?
In terms of
I can go after you.
you can go.
No, I go after you.
I think I'm one of the few people in our class who went to community college first. And I kind of mentioned this earlier, like it was very challenging for people to take me seriously as someone who wanted to.
It's okay.
As someone who wanted to go on to pursue a career in medicine. I remember very vividly that I was at a pre-med conference, and one of the admissions directors for a very prestigious school said I would never get into their school because I went to community college. And like it completely like I cried after hearing, like I was on a bus ride back to my summer program like crying. And it's like there's gonna be but anyway, so the thing is like there's gonna be a lot of people who are gonna tell you that you can't do it, it's not possible, people from your school don't get in, people who look like you don't get in, but just don't listen to them. As long as you're very determined and you're focused and you have good mentors and good people supporting you, anything is very possible. In terms of like explaining why I went to community college to people during my interviews, like it was mainly a financial reason. I struggled a lot financing my education. So I was in community college, I was working at the same time to pay the school fees and like studying after that. Then when I got into Cornell, people say if you get into an Ivy, you should just go. I just went, but like, shout out to my sister. She was like, I didn't even know what Cornell was. Like, just was the one who was like involved in all these like applying to all these like super selective schools and stuff like that. So she took me to like one of these conferences, and like it was the day before the application was due. I was about to delete it, and I talked to someone who was a representative of Cornell. She said, no, just like apply. Like people from my school, like they don't get in. People from my community college, like they either don't finish at all or they finish and just like don't do anything after that. So it was like, I didn't really have that expectation that I would be able to make it, but luckily I took the chance and applied and got in. And like going to Cornell from like a community college in Newark, New Jersey was like a very jarring experience, like seeing like the disparities involved and things like that. But like I said earlier, just like stay super focused on your end goal and like just work as hard as you can, meet the right people, and things will hopefully work out.
I also went to Cornell for undergrad, so just,
yeah. So I started off at Hunter, which I don't know how familiar you guys are with that school, but it's City University of New York. It is a 4-year school. I started off there, did a year there. It's a very competitive environment, especially your first 4 years. And I think word gets around as soon as you enter as a freshman that the first year biology courses are a way to weed people out. So I remember my first lecture was first semester, 800 people in a huge auditorium, which I actually graduated in from high school. Like that's where my ceremony was. So it's, imagine like a graduation style auditorium filled with like students. And by second semester, we were down to like 400 people. So that kind of gave you a sense of how I felt being in that environment. And I certainly didn't feel like it was conducive to helping me get the good grades that I knew I would need to get into med school and, you know, down the road. I was already thinking about that freshman year. So I actually transferred. I went to live with some family in Florida for about a year. That's where I went to a community college. It was a lot less intense. I think I had, like, a lot of things were different in my life. Like I had my own room. I think I felt like I could study a lot better compared to when I lived in New York. So I did a lot better, needless to say, because of the environment. It wasn't as competitive. Not everyone in that community college in Florida was even doing like science majors, so it was a lot more relaxed. But then one of the things I realized is that even though it was very competitive up here in New York at Hunter, there were a lot of resources and opportunities that I didn't have in Florida. Mm-hmm. So I came back to Hunter. They took me with open arms. You know, it was just a much smoother process anyways here in New York because I was a resident of New York for all my life. Florida was giving me a hard time. But anyways, so I did Hunter, went to Florida Community College, then came back and finished my bachelor's here at Hunter. And what is that called? The pre-health office at Hunter, they give you all this information, but I feel like they don't really track you or really make sure that you're keeping up with stuff. So it's you have to be very independent, very disciplined, very on top of yourself, because they're not gonna reach out to you and say, hey, you haven't submitted so-and-so. It's like, no, if you miss something, too bad, too sad, they don't really look after you. So that's one thing that, you know, it makes you mature really fast. I don't know if anyone else had that experience at any other school, but I certainly felt like you just have to stay on top of it. But I mean, I made it. One last positive thing I'll say about Hunter, at least, is that there's this thing called a committee letter, and I think most schools have that, versus like a letter packet. And ideally, the committee letter is what you want from your pre-health office, you know, for a number of reasons that I won't get into. But at my school, at Hunter, they ranked the committee letter. So let's say they were giving out 40 letters to 40 students. There was a number 1 student based on a criteria, and there was a number 40 student that got like the committee letter. So yeah, so when I spoke to the pre-health office, I really wanted the committee letter, but she actually advised against it. She said I would be better off getting a letter packet, because if she gave me a committee letter, I would be one of the lower ranking committee letter recipients, and schools could see that. So I was kind of nervous about that decision, because you get told so much committee letter, but you know, I trusted her judgment, and here I am. That's all I can say. I don't know if that worked to my advantage, like a lot or necessarily, but you know, everything in my application must have been well enough, you know, to get into a school like Cornell. So you know, trust the process. Take what people tell you with a grain of salt, whether that's from your institution or other people. Like Akena said, don't believe everything everyone tells you. Just kind of go with what works best for you, and take advice as you feel it's best or not best. So you guys have some.
I guess just real quick, just in terms of alumni, I think Taj was alluding to this before, but just like every school has alumni that have been on a similar path that you have, no matter if it's an Ivy or not Ivy, or like, you know, like state, you know, college, like, and so I really like stress the importance of like reaching out through your, you know, your alumni office at your school, just to see, you know, maybe there's some doctor out there that you could shadow, or like some like research opportunity you could take on for a summer, or like some, I guess like job if you're taking a gap year, like, you know, a job that you could apply to while you're applying to medical schools in those couple years. So I highly recommend reaching out to your alumni, no matter where you go to school.
I agree. I think the only thing I will say, not to like belabor the point, is I think even though I didn't go to an Ivy League school, like the pre-med culture was still like pretty competitive and like kind of hard to get through. So I would recommend if there are people like who are taking a similar route in some of your classes that you can sort of like link up with and study with, or like I think just having people kind of going through the same process with you makes it a little bit easier, because it kind of gets gradually harder and it can be a little bit isolating as people kind of get like weeded out or like kind of fall through the cracks going through the process. So I think that's something that sort of helps to kind of keep your morale up as you sort of like navigate the process.
Not necessarily about what school I went to, but I will say, especially for people who come from underrepresented backgrounds in medicine, maybe you don't have a family member who is in medicine or has gone through this path before, I really am a huge believer in digging into the things that make you unique, whether that's been hardship or just a different route. I'm an immigrant from Venezuela, and that was huge for me. I mean, not a lot of people can talk about the experiences of living in a country with a lot of political turmoil, economic instability, things like that. And that really is something that makes me somebody who has overcome. People who are bilingual, people who have worked in different industries and jobs and life experiences, people have families. All those things, I think, just contribute, make you unique. So it doesn't really matter how many hours you spent in a lab, because you're so much more than that. And I really encourage students of all races, ethnicities, whatever that is, just really dig into it, explore within yourself, and show that to the application committees, because they will value that, and it'll just set you apart from the crowd.
Awesome. So we're just about out of time. If that's anything to add, anyone else is saying?
Yeah, well, great job. I think we've answered most of the questions on the fly here. And in the interest of time, yeah, if you just want to go and give like 1 minute takeaway at the end, one has like last 1 minute thing to say about like the most important points for thinking about applications and everything.
Yeah. Take as much time as you can afford, that you need to develop yourself. Build and lean into the networks of people who supported you. They don't need to be people on the same track as you, but just people who are investing in your success. Maintain your authenticity in everything you put your name on, particularly your application. And have faith in yourself and in your process that you'll be able to be successful with the work that you put in. And those are, I think, some of the 4 biggest things I wish someone had written out to me when I got started on my process.
You are here for me, but trust in the plan, be yourself, and just everything you do it with passion, and do it from a place that you really, really care about.
Yes, going along with it. But like for extracurriculars, do things that make you passionate. Don't try like checking off the checklist, especially. I would, even though you guys are, it's great that you guys are thinking about like how to get to medicine, medical school, but I think as a freshman and sophomore, like also try to explore things and like find the things that you're passionate, because those things mean so much more in your application rather than like, oh, these are the things that I did for so-and-so. And then also logistically, like try to think a little bit in advance when you get around the application season. So like when you think, don't rush into anything and try to be strategic about the way you plan. How you say that you can, when to apply, and that sort of thing.
I would say be open to feedback, kind of like throughout your process. I think, especially for like writing and like essays and stuff, like quality and not rushing the process. I think like having, for me, for example, like my friends like read over my work and like tell me like, how does this come off? Like, what do you think? Like, do you think I'm portraying the best version of myself here? Like, what that looks like. People who know you and speak to that aspect of yourself is really helpful. And like you guys said, like maintain your authenticity and like focus on things that you're passionate about and invest in the quality as opposed to like quantity and just trying to fill up things on your application.
I think I agree with everything that everyone just said, but like just in terms of, I guess like the process itself, just like making sure it doesn't like consume you. Like I was taking gap years when I went through the process, like application cycle, and just making sure that, you know, you have, you know, the other priorities in your life, and making sure that you're on top of those as well. So making sure you're not too stressed about like waiting on like decision, like application decision making, like that. Just don't pause your life because of this school applications.
And building off that, the cycle kind of sucks sometimes. Like it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years, however long it's taking. You're waiting in limbo for months. You're applying. You don't know what's going to happen, and it's okay to feel really stressed out. It's okay to feel anxious about it. Just understand that you likely will feel anxious, and it's likely related to this. And to make sure you maintain your relationships with friends and family.
Yeah, agree with everything everyone said. I would say for me, it was stay organized. Just kind of know yourself, because I'm not a very organized and systematic person. So stay organized, stay systematic, because there are a lot of deadlines, and as you've already heard, there's a lot of planning that gets involved. And lastly, I would say, kind of like what Janice was saying, just surround yourself with people that are going to encourage you, because there are going to be a lot of people that won't encourage you, and a lot of little setbacks that might make you feel bad about yourself. But you know, don't let that stop you. That's where your support system comes in.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone has said so far. I don't really have much to add, but just remember, like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a long process. Like we're kind of in the beginning still. We're first year medical students, so don't rush the process. Additionally, like, make sure that this is something you really want to do. Like everyone has said, like, don't just check boxes off because you hear that's what you're supposed to do. Make sure that you actually take away things from these experiences, like whether it be shadowing, whether it be volunteering, whether it be research, whether it be scribing or being a medical assistant, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure that every experience that you have, that you're putting down on paper, is something that's adding to your application, is something that you actually took something from, something that you actually like gained some insight into why you want to go into medicine.
And to echo all the points made here already, honor the process and honor yourself during that process. I think it's very easy to look at the checkbox and say, okay, there's this perfect medical applicant who has 600 research hours, who might has shadowed 20 billion times, and who's done all this really cool cancer, save the world type stuff. But the thing about being an applicant is that what makes you unique is what will make you an amazing doctor. So my application, I taught yoga, I wrote a blog, and that's what people talk to me about the most, because that people didn't really do during their gap years or in applications in general. So honor what makes you special and what makes you you, and allow that to speak for you, and allow that to present to people why you should be a doctor and why you're so amazing.
For me, I think that you should realize that things are going to get hard, things are going to get tough, but it's very important to never give up. Don't give up on yourself, don't give up on the goal of being a physician, because once you get into medical school, you're going to need that to make you succeed and push you all the way for the next 4 years of the school training and then the residency, which follows soon. So just like be adamant about your pursuit of medicine and just don't give up on yourself.
I think one thing that we all kind of like danced around is that, but like not so explicitly, is that make sure you take care of like your mental health. Like anxiety is real, depression is real, all those things are real. So just make sure that if you don't have friends to talk to, there's your schools might have some like some resources for you to take advantage of. So make sure you're taking care of your mental health as well.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope we helped answer some of you guys' questions. We'll answer the audience questions later on with like a document with all the question answers. But so thank you.
Thank you guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for your questions.
If you have any other questions you didn't get a chance to put in the chat, you can always send them to primesmentorship@gmail.com that you got the invite through. Thanks a lot.